All right, picking back up with part two, beginning with module 26.7, organ system development. Organogenesis is the term for organ formation, and I already said the heart is beating in week 4, but other organs are forming, such as the eye, the ear, parts of the brain. Week 6, body proportions are changing, the limbs are getting longer, skull bones are forming. Um, If you take a look at these pictures here, you have a 6-week embryo right here, a fetus at the end of the first trimester, so that would be about 12 weeks. After 4 months of gestation, so that's about 16 weeks there. And here's an ultrasound of a fetus at 6 months gestation. Notice that you can see the forehead, the nose, the lips very clearly. So pregnancy does put some strains on the maternal system. There's on average, 13 to 15 pound weight gain. And this weight is not aligned with the body axis, so it requires more energy to maintain the balance. Respiratory rate and tidal volume has to increase because of the decrease in FRC because of the developing fetus pushing everything in the abdomen up, and that pushes up against the diaphragm, up against the lungs, decreases the tidal volume, therefore respiratory rate has to increase. The mammary glands begin to mature and become active, and by the 6th month they begin releasing a clear secretion. GFR in the kidneys, or glomerular filtration rate, increases about 50%, and because of the compression on the bladder by the uterus, frequency of urination also increases. Maternal blood volume increases about 50%. And you've heard it said when a woman's pregnant, hey, you're eating for 2 now. Well, really, the nutrient requirements increase by about 30%. The uterus begins to expand and goes from 30 to 40 grams, or 1 and 1.5 ounces, to about 2.5 pounds in weight. Labor is mainly caused by uterine stretching by the full-term fetus. Myometrium starts having spontaneous contractions. During early pregnancy, progesterone from the placenta inhibits this in most cases, but in late pregnancy, then labor will start to occur. You can have false labor, which is irregular contractions occurring in episodes, and true labor, which is continuous and progressive until birth occurs. We already talked about that. The fetus also releases oxytocin, which produces action similar to maternal oxytocin. The movement of the fetus by contractions stretches the uterine wall even more, causing more release of oxytocin and prostaglandins. And then parturition, or actual expulsion of the fetus and placenta, occurs in 3 stages. You have the dilation stage, which is when the cervix starts to dilate. Usually lasts about 8 or 9 hours on average. Those are average numbers. The second stage is expulsion, where the cervix is pushed open by the fetus. Contractions now occurring about every 2 to 3 minutes, and continues until delivery or birth. The third stage is called the placental stage, and this is when the placenta is expelled from the uterus. There is often some loss of blood at this time, which under normal circumstances is not much, but in some circumstances it can be considerable and even life-threatening. When labor begins before normal fetal development is completed, it's called premature labor. Whether the fetus can survive depends on its size and how long into gestation it is. Most fetuses under 400 grams or 14 ounces do not survive. Many born 25 to 27 weeks die despite high intensity care, but like I said, a lot of them are surviving at that gestational age. A postnatal development includes 5 life stages. There's the neonatal period, which is the first one, and this includes the first one, and then second one is infancy, the third one is childhood, fourth is adolescence, and 5 is maturity. So here you see it in pictorial form. You have neonate up to about 1 month, from 1 month to 2 years, infant 2 years to puberty, or about 9 years is childhood, 9 to 18 adolescence, and then above 18 maturity. Milk production for infants is by the milk letdown reflex, and the steps are sucking at the nipple triggers mammary gland secretion. These impulses go to the spinal cord and brain, stimulates neurons in the hypothalamus to release oxytocin. Oxytocin causes contraction of the myoepithelial cells in the lactiferous ducts, which produces milk ejection or letdown. So here we see another effect of oxytocin. It doesn't just cause contraction of the uterus, but it also causes aids in the production of milk from the breast. As you know, there are hormonal changes that occur at puberty. These effects are enhanced by other hormones. The hypothalamus increases release of gonadotropin-releasing hormone. Anterior pituitary releases more LH and FSH, and those cause in the gonads gamete production, secretion of sex hormones. You then have growth rate acceleration, epiphyseal plate, final closure. In males, of course, the primary hormone is testosterone. Affects all the body systems: integumentary, skeletal, muscular, nervous, cardiovascular, respiratory system. This is where you get growth of the larynx and lengthening of the vocal cords, producing a deeper male voice. Reproductive system, spermatogenesis. Estrogen, primary hormone in females, its effects on various body systems. In the reproductive system, you get thickening of the myometrium, increased blood flow to the endometrium, and promotion of functional development of accessory structures. All right, genetics and inheritance, or section 2 of this chapter. I just want to hit a couple of things. Some of this you may have gotten in other classes, but in genetics, genotype refers to genes on chromosomes within cells. And this would be similar to blueprints for building a house. The phenotype, meaning to display, is how the genotype is actually expressed. So this would be analogous to the actual completed house. So the genotype is the blueprint, the phenotype is the actual house or building, how the gene is expressed. karyotype is an entire set of chromosomes. And remember that after amphimixis, there are 46 chromosomes in a zygote, or 23 pairs. Okay, those chromosomes are called autosomal, which affect the somatic characteristics. In other words, are you going to have brown hair, red hair, blue eyes, brown eyes? And so those are 22 pairs of autosomal and 1 pair of sex chromosomes. That determines if you're male or female. Males have 1 X chromosome and 1 Y chromosome. Females have 2 X chromosomes. The chromosomes are made up of genes, and the genes are at certain points on the chromosome called a locus, and when you have 2 genes at a particular locus, that's called an allele. If they're the same 2 genes, then that's homozygous, homo meaning same. If they're 2 different genes, they're heterozygous. And each human chromosome has about 1,000 genes. So in inheritance, you have dominance and strict dominance. If you have strict dominance, then any dominant allele will be expressed in the phenotype. In other words, having freckles requires only 1 dominant allele. But a recessive allele is that you have to have the same allele on both homologous chromosomes. Having red hair requires recessive alleles. The Punnett square is a grid showing possible offspring genotypes. The dominant alleles indicated by capital letters, recessive alleles indicated by lowercase letters. So 2 capital letters represents a homozygous dominant. A capital and a lowercase is a heterozygous, and 2 lowercase is homozygous recessive. So 2 capitals, homozygous dominant, 2 lowercase, homozygous recessive. A capital and a lowercase is a heterozygous. All right, oftentimes you'll hear of something like a disease being is called an X-linked disease or X-linked problem. And that X-linked refers that it's carried on the sex chromosome. The X chromosome is much larger than the Y, carries more genes. And so the characteristics are X-linked or sex-linked because there's no corresponding allele on the Y chromosome. For example, red-green color blindness is carried on the X chromosome. Sometimes the genes can become or be abnormal, producing abnormal chromosomes. And 3 that I want to mention that's discussed in the book are trisomy 21 or Down syndrome. And that's when you have 3 copies of chromosome number 21. Klinefelter syndrome is when you have 2 X and a Y, sex chromosome pattern. Normally, I told you it's XY or XX, but in Klinefelter, there's an XXY. So the phenotype is male, but they have reduced androgen production. The testes fail to mature, so these individuals are sterile and their breasts are slightly enlarged. Turner syndrome is a sex chromosome pattern of XO, or in other words, there's only an X chromosome. There's a single sex chromosome called monosomy. No maturational changes occur at puberty, and there are non-functional ovaries. This individual on the right is someone with trisomy 21 or Down syndrome, and you see here that the 20 number 21 chromosome has actually 3, whereas all these others have 2. So that's a trisomy 21. Klinefelter, here you have the XXY chromosome. Note the enlarged breast tissue. Turner syndrome, XO, only a single female sex chromosome. And that's it. Thank you.